Is your child one who tends to follow the crowd? Or do you worry about that sort of thing that your child is one of those that's just going to follow along with what's going on? Well, I tell you, there are many ways to deal with this, but we don't need a world with a lot of followers, especially us in this world of homeschool work and some of us that care deeply about spiritual things. We need kids that grow up to be leaders, that are able to take to heart the moment and make a decision based on something other than polling of their friends. Well, I'm going to suggest there's a way to do it, and I think if you got to know our five children, you would find out that they're all pretty uh, powerfully independent, and yet cooperative and great and awesome and all that cool stuff. But I'm going to tell you one of the things I did as their dad growing up. I tried to teach them discernment. And the way I did that is I would use movies and books. Movies in particular, because we grew up in a world, and there's a world now, that a lot of the movies don't actually teach redeeming things or things that match our own personal faith. So what I would do is I would take them to the movie, or Mom would go too, we'd all go. And we'd go to the movie, and we would watch this movie that had things in it that we didn't exactly approve of. And you've got to be age appropriate and smart, but I'm not talking about, vulgarity. I'm talking about philosophies that are misleading or destructive or confusing that you don't want to overexpose someone to when they're too young because they don't have discernment. So to develop their discernment, we'd go to the movie, and after the movie, we'd go to a restaurant and order dessert or chips, or we'd have a meal, not usually expensive one. Being in Texas, we could go to all kinds of Mexican restaurants and load up on all kinds of fun things that weren't that expensive. And in that context, we would talk about the movie. And I always just want to talk about two things, besides how'd you like it, favorite scenes, whatever. What I would ask them would be this: what does this movie teach that we could all agree is good? And we would talk about that. And then I'd ask, what does this movie teach that we could all agree and understand is bad? It's not stuff we believe or want to embrace. And that was it. We would just talk about those two things. We would look at the good things that it taught and the not good things. And so time after time, as we did that, sometimes with TV shows, sometimes with books, other things, the children learned to discern. They learned to look at things and say, what about this is good, and what about this is not quite? And so in that way, they were taught to evaluate, to think, to discern, so that they could make sense of their own choices. Most of us aren't taught this. We just go through life believing whatever we hear on radio, television, in a book, printed, on a blog, instead of thinking for ourselves, what in here is good, what in here is not. And by the way, thinking everything's bad and deciding an article has nothing good in it, just as non-discerning is the person that just accepts everything. You want to do both. That's where discernment happens. And that actually is where your kids can quit following the crowd and think for themselves.